Music and programmatic marketing have a lot in common. Okay, not really, but it is fitting that the December 2024 edition of the Digiday Programmatic Marketing Summit is happening here in Music City, Nashville, Tennessee. That's because an underrated part of any gold album is knowing which songs to put in and which to leave out. You might call it curation. Curation is also a crucial component of programmatic advertising, knowing which sites to include in an ad buy and which to leave out. And curation's always been a programmatic pillar, but for some reason in 2024, it's become one of the bigger buzzwords. Why? I'm not so sure. I'm also not super clear on the difference between curated marketplaces and other types of programmatic marketplaces. Or even to what extent these curated marketplaces are necessary from an advertiser's perspective. But that's what I'm here to find out.
Yeah, I mean, in the simplest form, it's the best selection of inventory. And that obviously is vague, but that's what it's trying to say.
Curation, from our perspective, at a very baseline, is really about having control over where we're reaching our audience and the type of content we are in.
It's all about just restricting the set of inventory that you're accessing when you're buying media programmatically.
You're creating sort of an inventory, a premium inventory, an environment that you don't have to worry about brand safety and addressability and all those things, right? And testing that out to say, if I do that versus an open exchange, is that more effective in terms of addressability and your campaign's KPIs, or do you just go through the open exchange?
All right, so before we can really talk about this curation trend, we should probably break down what exactly curated marketplaces are. For some reason, my mind thought of wine as an apt analogy for curated marketplaces. So here goes. So you know those bottles of red blends at the supermarket that are super cheap because they combine a bunch of different wines, but you don't really know what you're getting? That's the programmatic open marketplace. On the other end of the spectrum, you could go to a vineyard, pick out your own grapes, and get a one-of-a-kind bottle of wine. But that gets pretty pricey and time-consuming to visit a bunch of vineyards to stock your wine cellar. This is akin to a publisher-specific private marketplace deal. A compromise could be signing up for a Wine of the Month club that sends you a box of bottles hand-selected by some self-proclaimed wine connoisseur. And that would be the curated marketplace. But are curated marketplaces really all that different from private marketplaces? Well,
so your question is a good one. One really has to wonder, is it really that much different from a PMP? I suppose it sounds more artisanal, more hand-selected. Maybe that works as a trend, although maybe we're 10 years past that, so I'm not really sure.
I have a hard time believing there's really much distinction other than different names, different platforms, different ways of doing it, and not two different ways of doing it. We're just talking. I also like to break through anything in an automated space and anything that we're looking at. Like Google is one form of data set. Programmatic, we have all these different data sets. So if we kind of try to oversimplify it, that's kind of what we're looking at. I'm not saying that it doesn't have value and it doesn't have things, it's just different name, same kind of product.
When we say private marketplace, what we're typically saying is like a single company, right? Whether that's at the SSP level or that's at the publisher level. So one is the ability to scale across. And then the other thing that I would say is that, from a human capital and media planning standpoint, right? Like PMPs, PG deals, those are individual line items, and you have to really thoughtfully compile a bunch of those in order to hit scale for a client. And the goal of a curated marketplace, right, is to reduce a lot of that workload and add a lot of efficiency so that you are able to scale full budgets against sort of a single line item.
There are off-the-shelf marketplaces, which are created. It could just be sports content, it could be news, it could be cooking content. A curated marketplace is a subset of that. So a buyer may come up and decide they need a specific set of inventory or a specific set of publishers. They may have specific deal terms with a set of publishers, which then they would want within this marketplace. It could also be done for pricing as well, right? So if you want certain marketplaces to clear at a certain max bid, then you may curate the marketplace for that. So it could be done for efficiency, for targeting. The other thing that it's done for is if you want the SSP to do the filtering or the targeting, on their side, you may want a bigger marketplace and then have them apply whatever data that they have available and then surface it to the SSP, maybe at a fixed bid or something along those lines, again, for efficiency, but also for a little bit more targeted and curated experience.
Curated marketplaces make a lot of sense for publishers in particular, especially small and mid-sized publishers who may otherwise have a hard time pitching their inventory as premium to advertisers when it otherwise gets lost in a pool of impressions. But what part do they play for advertisers?
For buyers, I would say number one is cost efficiency, right? So if you're entering into a curated marketplace and you're not getting more cost efficient media, all things being equal, right? Like quality of the inventory, performance metrics, then find a different curated marketplace, right?
In terms of what the buyer gets back, I think they should be driving efficiency. I think there should be a little bit more transparency. Ideally, they're getting more data passed back in the bid request, but that's not always the case.
I haven't seen a strong enough case. I think for us, we would probably need to know at the end of the day, like, what is the gain in terms of efficiency or access to inventory? And again, something curated, how is that really different from a private marketplace deal we've been able to access in the past?
There is an assumption that the quality will be higher because there is a sort of process that curates the inventory. And I think that in many cases, everybody in the previous years has examples of bad contextual advertising, memes and stuff that we say your ad, popped up in the wrong place, and that's something that of course brands want to avoid. And again, I say it's an assumption because not necessarily there is full transparency of how the vetting process works, and so it's not a full, a full pass on the network, and the brand doesn't care anymore, but it's still a step towards an ability to have more control, I would say, but still at a scale that is big enough.
A funny thing about curated marketplaces is they're actually not all that new. Some have been around for several years. I mean, you could even make the argument that ad networks were the original curated marketplaces. So then why was this year the year in which curation became the big buzzword in programmatic advertising?
They're certainly not new. I think there's been a lot of press around it this year, for sure. There's been a lot of unfortunate negative screenshots that have been taken, potentially. And the last thing any of us want to do is have our clients' ads or our ads alongside problematic content. So I think, with the ability to have more control over the inventory and just the level of transparency into it, I think there's been a huge focus on it this year.
There was a push to say that the open internet is okay. Then there's curated marketplaces really came into the fold there as to, well, don't spend the majority of your time and your money in the open, but then find those curated marketplaces and find those selective inventory choices and formats and options, and that's the right way to do programmatic. That's where I think it was that's where it started to really raise the flag there, I would say. So, curated marketplaces, like you said, it's not a new thing, but as the ecosystem continues to evolve and change over time, there's always going to be that push to open versus curated.
There have been a lot of concerns around brand safety. There was some reporting earlier this year around whether or not some of the brand safety tools that are out there have been as effective as they've claimed. And whether or not you believe that reporting, I certainly think that it has made people more cautious about what they want to access and making sure that they're getting in on high quality inventory, avoiding MFAs and things like that. So it's just been a way to bring that back to the fore and make sure it's top of mind for people.
So those all seem like perfectly valid reasons for Curation to claim the crown as programmatic's word of the year. But there may be another reason.
A few clients somewhere in a conference somewhere probably all heard it, and then they went back to their agencies, and now it looks fantastic on a pitch deck.
I mean, what the